Thank you so much for staying with us. My guest is here, Professor Bell Ihua, Executive Director, African Polling Institute, and visiting Professor of Practice in Opinion Research at the Coast City University in Enugu. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Dr. Anakwue. It's great to be here.
Okay, our attention will be focused on cohesion and unity of Nigeria. That's the dream of our founding fathers. That's the hope. That's the expectations. But some will say we have to unite the people first before we unite the country. Similar to what ECOWAS is doing. ECOWAS of the people, that are focusing on the people. So we have to focus on the people in Nigeria. And when we focus on the people, perhaps the leadership also very vital in this area. Let's start with the 61st Independence Anniversary speech of the president. To what extent do you think it promotes social cohesion and unity?
Well, thanks for that. I think first things first, it's to acknowledge that some progress has been made from 1999 to now. The fact that democracy has been sustained up until this point is great progress, and it's worth acknowledging. I'm looking at the President's Independence Day speech. I think it was tempered, it was measured, it addressed most, if not most of the issues facing the country at the moment. The President harped a lot on health, trying to encourage citizens to, maintain the COVID protocols and, persuade citizens to go out and take their vaccines and all of that. He also talked about the economy, talked about the expansion of Empower from 500,000 to 1 million, talked about trying to boost the economy such that it becomes a little more inclusive and Nigerians have more opportunity to thrive under the climate. Looks also into the issue of roots into governance. I thought that was a really useful point, the realization that presidency or the government at whether federal, state or local government levels are beginning to understand that the youth stock of the country is a huge resource base that can be tapped into to help drive this 21st century governance that we hope to see in the country. The president also talked about food shortages. He had said that food shortages were due to hoarding. Whether I agree with that or not is a different matter. We know from research, for example, that the reason for the hike in food prices is because a lot of farmers, due to insecurity, couldn't farm, and we're experiencing that bite now where we need the food to come.
So the president has a team with middlemen, because his military head of state time, he also blamed them for rising food prices.
So these are some of the issues. He also talked about ICT, and he mentioned security and national cohesion. So if you ask me whether he talked about cohesion, yes, his speech mentioned cohesion, but there are two takeaways for me from his speech. One, he mentioned that for independence to happen in 1960, the North, the South, the West, and the East needed to come together, and for the continual the existence of this country, the North, the South, and the East, still need to remain together, to work together. That's one. Two, he mentioned the fact that the government is open to dialogue, and that it's better to judge than to war, and they'll be willing to dialogue with any responsible group or section of the society. So to that extent, I'll say it's tempered. However, being an independent speech, I would have also been looking for something more visionary, more inspirational, telling us about what Nigeria can be. What is that future, that, if you will, El Dorado, but what is that sort of future that inspires hope, that inspires a fresh hope where citizens can have something to really look up to? I didn't think that element came out quite well in the speech.
We also saw some threats, especially to secessionists. They said they will hunt them down.
That's right.
How will it help our cause here and our objective?
It's a carrot and stick from his speech. It was more or less like a carrot and stick. So for those who are willing to dialogue, we'll give them the carrot, we'll engage them with dialogue. But for those who are not willing to dialogue, we'll then use the stick against them. So it's, you expect that from any government, especially in his own words, if it leads to a threat in the peace and security and stability of the nation, they will have to be honored.
That will depend if there are opportunities created by the government for dialogue.
Precisely. I mean, this is the number one man of the country saying that the government is open for dialogue. So if at that level, he's saying that, you know, open up the country for dialogue, and that's what really one of our big points from our study. You know, we'll come to that, but that's one of the big points, that there needs to be more opportunities for debates, more opportunities for dialogue, more opportunities to judge or allow citizens contribute, because those are part of ways of promoting
to ventilate the anger and all that.
Exactly.
And there were talks of the national conference, which the president outrightly rejected, describing the last one in 2014 as job for the boys. Perhaps he doesn't see that dialogue in that form, a dialogue in that form.
Well, for me, the point is, if you think that was the job for the boys, can we have another one? Can we have one that sort of meets the criteria that you think the country needs to have? We need to have that judge. Or I think it's all over the country. It's understood that the current trajectory and the current movement may not necessarily be where citizens aspire that the country should be headed. So there needs to be a conversation, whether you call it a social conversation, a conversation of ethnic groups, whatever you call it, there needs to be a conversation happening.
And where are we now? Some people believe, the president also made reference to it, that the last 18 months has not been the best for the country. Some will say, even during the time of the Civil War, we were not this divided. We didn't see much of social mistrust and division. Now, what does cohesion mean for Nigeria presently, going by some research you have conducted?
Thank you very
how
much.
do we trust each other? How do we open up with each other? How do we work in tandem with each other? Because if we don't do that, it's just be like movement in a circle.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you just sort of brought me into the heart of the work we've been, the Africa Polling Institute have been working on in the past 2 years. So in 2019, we conducted the first Nigeria Social Cohesion Survey. And in 2021, just last month, in the month of 2 months ago, in late August, we released a copy of the, I brought you a copy, by the way, released a copy of the Nigeria Social Cohesion Survey, and we organized the Nigeria Social Cohesion Dialogue, where we brought key leaders together to understand some of the findings of this data. What our study showed, you know, first of all, the concept of social cohesion looks about the cooperation of citizens, an agreement to cooperate in order to survive and to prosper. So there are two key elements. The first element is the survival element. So we can see as Nigerians that perhaps we are surviving because we are still one. But the question is, are we prospering together as a nation? And that's where a lot more work needs to be done to ensure that we are not just surviving, that we are prospering as a nation. And so between 2019 and 2021 that we conducted this study, there were quite a number of findings. So number one, for example, you just mentioned, in 2019, we asked Nigerians, how united or divided do you think the country is at the moment? In 2019, 45% of Nigerians said they thought the country was much more divided than 4 years ago. In 2021, we asked that same question to Nigerians. 65% of Nigerians now say that the country is much more divided. So it tells you that between 2019 and 2021, we've jumped 20 points in the proportion of Nigerians who think the country. So that is
divided. So we are moving in the wrong direction.
So that alone tells us that there's a lot of work to be done. Secondly, is the issue of trust. And we also see that there's been a decline in trust for state institutions, for the government. So in 2019, for example, we asked, how do you trust the government of President Buhari? About 42% say yes, they trust his government. But by 2021, that number declined to 26%. So we see at least a 16-point decline there.
So two things. Why trust of government and state institution is declining at a fast pace, perception that we are not united is going the other way. Very dangerous for the nation.
What the data showed is that there is a huge gap, a disconnect, if we may use that term, between the government and the governed. And, you know, part of of the findings of this study showed that at least 6 in 10 Nigerians believe that government is not doing enough to promote inclusion. So when people feel that they are not included, people feel excluded, people feel marginalized, people feel that no one is looking out for them or looking out for issues that concern them, then you get this sort of reaction. And it's not just about the federal government alone. Even the National Assembly, as at 2019, 33% thought the National Assembly, about 23% said they had trust, but their trust level had declined to 22% in 2021. So we see that for the government at all tiers. But in addition to that, there's also, you look at social justice. So 74% of Nigerians, yes, another key component of cohesion. 74% of Nigerians at the moment feel that the law does not apply equally to everyone, that some Nigerians are more equal under the law than others. And this is not a very useful perception to have.
But that's the absence of the rule of law. On paper, if you apply this information, this data from this research, if you want to apply it in a controlled environment, it amounts to anarchy. Because perception is stronger than reality. And what you gauged was the perception of people.
That's right.
So it should send an alarm bell.
It should. You see, the data is not just telling something that people want to say it looks negative. No, it's actually great data, because it then helps the policymakers and the government to understand the areas that attention should be focused. So, for example, a lot more needs to be done about promoting social cohesion, not just at the federal level, but at the state and the local government levels. Are there levers of cohesion that local government can pull, that state government can pull? I mean, the president, for example, said he had scaled up the Empower program from 500,000 youths to 1 million youths. That's great, but it's still a drop in the ocean for a 200 plus million population, of which 70% are below the age of 35. So you see that much as the National Social Investment Program are trying their best to do their programs and all of that, it's still a drop in the ocean. So until it translates from this very high sounding and to more of the grassroots and bringing it down to the local government and creating an enabling environment. Let me use this opportunity to say that it's important also that the government needs to look critically at this issue of Twitter and allow Twitter to come back, because Twitter was more or less like a tool that gave not just young Nigerians, but Nigerians generally the opportunity to be part of governance. I mean, the raison d'etre of democracy is that citizens have an opportunity to participate, and sort of one of those tools that gives citizens the opportunity to participate has sort of been taken out, and so if that is not restored, it continues to have an ill feeling when citizens.
Now, let's try to break down to, of course, gauge the wider implications of the outcome of your research. If about 75% of Nigerians believe that there is no justice,
yes,
the resultant effect, 74, right?
Yes.
The resultant effect is that they will resort to self-help.
That is right.
That's why I talked of anarchy on paper. If the greater majority of the people refer to self-help, and it may reflect and explain what is happening in some parts of the country. Now, that is on one hand. On the other hand, if about 65% of Nigerians don't trust and believe in the unity of this country,
that's right.
They will take actions to the opposite. And we know what it will happen. It may explain secessionist agitations and all those other activities. And what's the third leg that you brought in again?
Well, see,
the third leg I'm trying to...
So there's trust, there's identity.
The trust of state institutions.
The trust of
if it's eroding, doing very poorly, then how can the government and the citizens work in a concerted manner to achieve development?
Well, good question. And now it's important that we balance this data. So much as the data shows that 65% of Nigerians think that the country is much more divided today than it was 4 years ago, it's important to also state that at least almost 63% of Nigerians say they believe that the future of this country will be brighter than it is today. That's one. Two,
very significant.
Yes, two, more than 6 in 10 Nigerians also believe that they are willing to work together with ordinary citizens of other ethnic groups to make this country work. So first we see that there is a concerted, attempt, if I may use that term, or willingness by Nigerians to see that the country works. So all that's required is more or less like a catalyst to help propel that process. And that's why one of the take-homes for us, and one of what we put forward, is that we need a new national movement, one that inspires hope, one that fights injustice, fights exclusion, and gives every Nigerian a sense of belonging. Because cohesion basically is about having a sense of belonging. If citizens have a sense of belonging, they feel committed to the cause called Nigeria. In the 70s, there were certain individuals referred to as the super permanent secretaries. Dr. Alison Ayida, Ambassador JTF Iyala, Philip Asiedu, Chief Jerome Odoji, and the one who most recently passed on, Alhaji Ahmed Joda. Now, these gentlemen, yes, were referred to as people who sort of held this country on their shoulder to ensure that Nigeria will not go down, and they were talking and working hard to promote unity. Most of the policies we see today that promote unity were introduced at that era. So the question now,
the federal character,
exactly. So the question now is, where are the policies, our policymakers,
policies and programs?
Exactly. And then where are the citizens, our super citizens, who will say we will not give up on the system, will continue to work for the system, and that brings us to that office of who is the responsible officer.
And there are citizens who have attained the highest officer of the land, especially at the bureaucratic level, but on retirement they go back to the ethnic cocoons.
Precisely, and that should not be the case. Do we have citizens who are constantly speaking unity, trying to promote unity, trying to promote oneness? And it's because we've had a decline in such citizens. That's why you have other elements who have become ethnic champions, who have now taken the space and have become popular amongst their people. If we had such voices who are constantly putting forward this issue of unity and speaking to unity, would have a more...
Perhaps they are responding to pressures from their citizens who are not believing much in the youth of the country.
The truth of the matter is, if you want to look at the evidence, there's enough evidence to say we should go our ethnic way and we should not look at the nation. But we're talking democracy here. What is the vision of the founding father? If you listen to the words of the first stanza and the second stanza of the national anthem, you know that it's cohesion we're talking about. It's a piece that resonates cohesion in its entirety. And so if we go back to the thinking of our founding father is, can we have a nation that, in spite of differences in tribe, in spite of differences in tongue, religion, or whatever you may call it, we still remain united as one indivisible force that will become the pride of the black nation, and that will become the pride of every black man on earth. And it's achievable. It's achievable. All we need are policies that are geared toward promoting cohesion, promoting inclusion, promoting trust. Because as I said, trust has really declined.
There's a lot of burden on the government to really see to this. We mentioned pro-unity policies and programs and institutions that came down in the 70s. One of them is the federal character.
That's right.
A lot of people say the composition of the management of the federal character that is supposed to administer even distribution of resources is skewed. For the first time in its history, both the chairman and secretary are from one part of the country. How does it help in the work you're doing, in the hopes of our dreams of our founding fathers and our expectations that we show true, united, cohesive country?
Their expectations. You see, clearly what our work over the years have shown is that when it comes to the average Nigerian is looking for a safe, peaceful country where he has access to equal opportunities and he is not in any way deprived of access to good health, access to the basic necessities of life. And that's what Nigerians are looking for. But when we have a situation where there is a growing population and the policies and the resources are not matching the growing population, we would have these tendencies for citizens to begin to feel a huge sense of neglect. And that is all we see. I mean, I've just returned from a tour of a few states on data collection, and everywhere we go, we hear citizens expressing concerns about neglect, about exclusion, and only hoping that we can have leaders who would say, can we, in our own space, for example, are there leaders who will say, in my state, I'm going to fund sports? We know, for example, that only when Nigeria is playing, you know, football,
sense of
that nobody cares where are you from. Right? So we can see that sports is a major tool for national cohesion. But then the question is, are we going to invest in that as a tool and use that to bring Nigerians together and rally? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area.
A whole lot of work. That takes us to our break. When we come back, more on factors that will engender unity and cohesion in Nigeria. Do stay with us.
They cannot deregister you because they didn't give you a prior notice.
We say they have the powers
to register.
Yes.
But you are saying they didn't give you a prior notice.
If you have a faulty leadership recruitment process to the top tier of government, you will not expect the same process that will produce certain officials, and you expect them to speak for the truth.
Every state that is currently being governed by caretaker committee knows that it's a constitutional infraction.
What we have now in Ajaokuta, the steel complex is almost 95% completed, running to over 30 years. And where are we? We couldn't produce.
Well, that's the much we can take on the program tonight. Remember to follow me on my handle at EJ Osamo.
Thank you so much for staying with us. My guest has been Professor Bell Ihua, the Executive Director of African Polling Institute, and our task is to dig deep into the level of social cohesion in Nigeria, see how we it and how we could actually be deployed towards the national unity and development. Thank you so much for staying with us.
Thank you.
Just pity the kind of work you're doing. Because of the kind of societies we have found ourselves, some say we don't apply knowledge to our efforts. I see reports from National Bureau of Statistics, scientific, that could be replicated, that are valid and consistent. When they paint a bad picture of a certain person or institution or government, they attempt to discredit that report. They question it without basis, just on the face value. And once yours come up too, I can also imagine the kind of responses you get, especially within government circles.
Well, the truth of the matter is part of state building is building strong institutions. Building strong institutions such that it's not about the big man who is there. It's that the institutions have been structured in such a way where it can deliver services, public services to citizens, no matter where they come from. And one of those key state institutions are those state institutions that provide critical research that will help policymakers make informed, evidence-based and data-driven decisions. You know, we talk about MBS, you talk about the National Populations Commission, and they are doing a great job. But again, leaders or policymakers taking that data and looking into it. The work that we do, for example, at API is complementary to the work that MBS and MPOPC they do. And we look at the human angle. A lot of, you know, talk about some of the high figures, but can we get that human angle that's mostly avoided or mostly not looked at? Can we go to the citizens and say, but then again, it's an expensive venture. So, you know, the Social Cohesion 2021 report was supported by Ford Foundation. That's an international organization. But until we come to that point where we begin to value data and such that, you know, public institutions, state institutions, as you know, the usual talk in public circles where you go as a researcher and explain that we've got some great research. You want to
see as an irritant.
The conversation is about paucity of funds. You say, you know,
I do visit National Bureau of Statistics. Yeah. I also do visit the offices of National Population Commission in Abuja and across the states that I saw. And these are the supposed engine house of the government. It tells you about the importance attached to it, the level of funding that go into it, apart from what foreign technical partners are bringing into these places. I bet they will struggle.
Well, at least we know for MBS, we work closely with them. With a couple of projects we're working together with MBS. Dr. Yemi Kale, just before he left, did an excellent job for his 2 tenures, I think 8 years that he spent there. Did a brilliant job. Dr. Simon Harry, who was just taking over, is also a decent gentleman, and I know he's been in the institution for 30 years thereabout, understands the institution in and out, and that continuity will help him also do an excellent job. But what we know is that these institutions charged with providing useful data for the country are poorly funded. And, part of our clamor over the years have been, can we have, these institutions properly funded, and some of us who are some of the private guys also trying to contribute to the research space, can we also be funded? Because ultimately, things have to change. In the past, as I always say, for data to be accepted and considered credible in the country, it has to be released by one of the international organizations. But we have to move to the point whereby, as local researchers, our work, findings from our research should be accepted anywhere and to be able to be used by, policymakers.
Well, let's go down to the state and local government level, because we have been at the federal level.
That's right.
What the problems at the federal level also notice at the state level. For instance, where the governor comes from is the senatorial zone that receives the best attention. And it goes further down up to the local councils, if they still have money to execute a capital project. So it's a problem that cuts across and is deepening. And the citizenry are accepting it. That's why this is our turn, is their turn, has become fully entrenched in our body politic.
You're absolutely right. And that is why, for some of us and the work that we do, we promote the unity of this country. Because however you choose to move the country apart or decimate the country, you still find out that within those substructures, there can be marginalization. So even within states, there are, conversations around, oh, it's not for my zone. This zone has had it for 2 terms. Our zone has not had within states. If you even go down within local government, this quarter, this community has been, this community has not. And that's why we must look for policies at state, at local government levels, especially, that promote cohesion. That promote, are there policies we can take at the grassroots level that can promote cohesion, especially for our young people? When you go to the states, when you go down to the local government, I visit these places a lot because I go to collect data. You see a lot of angst amongst young people. They are not happy. Now, one might say they are not happy about the federal government, but the truth of the matter is the government closest to them is doing very little for them, and they're not happy with the local government, the state government, and also the federal government. So a lot more needs to be done at the grassroots level to ensure that we can create opportunities. There are young, talented, smart Nigerians. I met a young guy in Onisha who had created an app to be able to network the markets in main market, the dealers and the sellers in main market Onisha into an app, so that from any part of the country you can actually
access the market.
Buy stuff from main market. You can see the price. You can buy. It will be delivered to you. I mean, so the young Nigerians who are creative, who are talented, who want just an opportunity to excel. But when that opportunity is lacking and they hold that for long, we begin to get this thinking towards the mass exodus. Something interesting that came out from our study was that in 2019, we asked the question, if you had the opportunity to emigrate with your family, would you consider immigration? At the time, about 33% said they would be willing to emigrate if they had the opportunity. We asked that same question in 2021. About 72% said if they had the opportunity, they would emigrate. So what has happened between 2019 and 2021 such that more Nigerians are now thinking, if they are not at any point in time, are now thinking that they want to consider.
And those that are not living or thinking of that are those that are elderly. but their children, especially for the elite, a greater percentage upon completion of secondary school, some of them that stay behind to do first degree, jet out of the country.
Precisely. And for those who are not even, you may seem as if they're not thinking, there also is also a conversation around the plan B. Everybody's thinking about the plan B. And that's why we need to work to unite this country. We need to work hard to reduce
what is a second passport
we are seeing,
Plan B, one of these is second passport.
Yeah, for some
and
people.
we are beginning to see the number expand.
Precisely. And that's why, a lot of work needs to be done. There's the economic part, there is the political part, there is the social part. One of the social parts, for example, is that we need our traditional, leaders and religious leaders to do a lot more. So the data shows that citizens have more trust in religious leaders and traditional rulers. At least 50%. The highest data, 55% for religious leaders and almost 50% for traditional rulers, compared to 26% for the president, 22% for the National Assembly. So it tells you in the minds of citizens where the trust lies. So
the traditional institutions.
Traditional institutions and religious leaders.
These institutions set up by Western democracy.
So it tells us that a lot more needs to be done at that level. I'm glad to see that the government is trying to reach out to engage these leaders. A lot of speaking, a lot of dialogue, a lot of conversation. After everyone wants to stay in a place that's peaceful, where you are not, discriminated against in any way because of your religion, your ethnicity, or where you come from.
Now, we've talked about the policies, programs, and institutions that are intended to indeed unite the country. We mentioned the National Youth Service Corps, the Federal Character Commission, and all that. Despite the existence for decades, we are still moving towards the opposite direction. What do we do then? Expand our operations or expunge them and create new ones?
We really need to sit down and look into the objectives that led us to setting up those institutions in the first place. There was this huge furore in the media recently about some statements in the NYSC manual and the new NYSC manual. Security tips when you're traveling along certain areas. You inform a family member so that they would hold, and all of that sort of
make provisions for ransom payment.
If we have gotten to that point where an institution that was set up to promote unity, to promote oneness, to promote the 3 R's, as it were, after the Civil War, has gotten to the point where tips like this are given, then it means we need to sit down and reevaluate the essence of such institutions. And that's why one of our calls is that institutions like NYSC, the government, especially at federal level, needs to have a session, a dialogue, to sit down and look through NYSCs. Is it just a white elephant project that's constantly consuming resources, or is it one that we need to probably restructure its current mode of operation for effectiveness? Because as it operates today, the effectiveness or the intended objective of the royal fathers is no longer being seen. And
the second option sounds excites me rather, because if there's any way to kill an institution, is just to refuse to reform it. Same thing with the federal character principle. We see clear violations and nothing happens. That's a reign of impunity.
A lot more needs to be done, in all honesty. We need to sit down and take a look. And that's why we encourage debates. In the past, debates were, things that were encouraged even in secondary school back in the 80s, 90s. You had clubs, debate clubs and all of that, just to promote debates, to promote engagements, amongst young people, amongst, elderly. We need to get back to those points where debates are critical. I think there are a lot of things we're putting under the carpet, sweeping under the carpet, that we don't want to come out and debate. Population control, for example. Don't we need a conversation to say, should we sit down and look at this? Should we have a peg on some of these issues? Should we have, it appears there are certain areas of our existence as society where we say, don't go there, don't talk about it. You can see it, see nothing, say nothing, hear nothing. But
A clear example is the unity of the country.
The more
those at the helm of affairs, at the Aso Rock will always tell us it's a no-go area. You shouldn't talk about it.
We should have the conversation. It's important that we have the conversation. Part of my work at Coal City University, we just concluded something called the Southeast Barometer, to be released to the public shortly, probably the end of the month or next month. The university is still tying that up. Is looking at the opinions and the attitudes and opinions of Southeasterners. We, poll citizens across the 5 Southeast states to get there. And from the findings, you see that a part of democracy is actually giving people the opportunity, the option to see whether they still want to be part of the union or not, asking those questions and engaging them to see what are the issues and what are those agitations. I think it goes beyond saying that instead of just going out to clamp down on separatists, agitators and all of that, we also need to, to be balanced. There are some of them, or there are institutions, or there are groups that we need to call and have a civil conversations with to know whether we want this to go on. And I believe that if those opportunities for dialogue are provided, it will be better for us all, for the continued existence of the country.
Talking of dialogues and platform for such a social engagement, I recall the debate then Ibrahim Babangida military administration instituted over the IMF loan. It was the national debate, and a lot of people kidding, and it helped a lot.
Precisely.
At the end of the day, many believed the nation was dribbled into the SAP, because according to the administration, because there is an overwhelming rejection of the IMF loan, the only alternative is structural adjustment.
But at least there was a debate. At least there was a debate that allowed experts for and against to air their opinions, to put their opinions on the table. It was aired on TV, it was aired on the radio, the newspapers, took that story out. So citizens were aware that there was a debate and, could sort of reflect for themselves for and against, do I want to be, do I not want to be part of this? And I think that's what's lacking. We need to come back to those days where dialogues are engaged, debates are engaged. It will help to foster the much needed unity that the country is looking for at the moment.
Now, there are a number of debates, the Abacha conference, the Jonathan conference. We don't see anything at the end of it, but some people believe the mere fact that they held in the first place. The mere fact, for instance, the 2014 National Conference, and 98, if not all, % of decisions reached were on consensus. There was no voting. So it tells you that when we dialogue, initial stages it will be rancorous, but at some point we see similarities and we focus on them and we reach a common ground.
Precisely. That's the essence of dialogue. Sometimes we may disagree, but we disagree to agree. We disagree so that we can come back and agree. And that's a critical element of dialogue. It doesn't mean that dialogue will not be without disagreements, but that those dialogues happen and people disagree to eventually agree, and that's what's currently missing. We need those dialogues to happen. You look at also the not just the national conference dialogue, you look at other dialogues that have happened in the past. It goes without saying that one of the reasons why we're not having the dialogues being implemented is the political will. So you get the dialogues, we're excited that okay, some decisions have been made, and we're all gearing up and hoping that okay, implementation will start very soon. And all of a sudden, it goes from let's pass the resolution from that dialogue to another committee to review. That committee reviews, then exactly we move that to the white paper, the team that draft the white paper, we move that also
to cover by trust.
Till another issue comes up in the polity that overshadows that. So we need to move from dialogue to the point where we begin. Look at the Oronsai report. Excellent piece of document that helps us, gives us a guide to restructuring this country, cutting the cost of governance.
Absolutely.
But we need the political will to be able to.
How do we invent the political? Because it appears that it transcends the successive administrations. The Jonathan administration set it up. It didn't have the will to push it through. Muhammad Buhari administration met it. At some point, there were some movements as to the Attorney General and Minister of Finance. But at the end of it all, it fizzles out again. How do we invent that politics?
Well, government is meant to be...
We have to purchase it?
Government is meant to be a continuum. So it doesn't matter who started it or who, you know, we need those who are reflective. And that's why building up to 2023, you know, it's for citizens to be responsible to their call, responsible to their mandate as citizens, and say, can we identify leaders who would be able to take bold decisions? Leadership is not about always smiling. Leadership is about taking bold decisions to move the country from where it is to where it ought to be. So we need leaders who will be able to look at decisions right in the face and say, okay, these are the findings. We know the benefit it's going to give us, and we will make. Sometimes it may be painful. Look at the shutting of the border, for example, had huge implications. People couldn't get things into the country. It led to cost of goods going up at some point. But then we also knew the effect. If only it was balanced out such that farmers were able to go to their farms and actually farm, we would have seen the impact on the economy. But insecurity had its own part it was playing, so that farmers, and that's why we're experiencing this sort of inflation. If I choose to go to the inflation of food prices now, it's a different matter entirely.
Okay,
but, you know,
based on where we are in terms of social cohesion, we're at an alarming stage, no doubt. What form of action is needed? Is it the usual incremental action or radical transformational action to save this ship?
Well, the truth of the matter is we still have a nation that's running. We have representatives in the National Assembly. We elected a president who's still in power. It's not about radical or slow. It's about advocacy to the government to see that there are actions that need to be taken that will affect the common man. There are actions that need to be taken. In body language, in actual implementations, there are things that need to be done to promote inclusion. The data shows clearly that Nigerians do not think enough is being done by the government to promote inclusion. Then it presents an opportunity for the government to sit down, call its think tanks together, call the team together, say, what should we be doing at state level?
That's the concept. That's the natural. That is supposed to be the natural response. But in reality, we don't see it.
Yes, and that's why we need to change that order. And as we begin to walk to 2023, these are some of the, part of our polls are talking about what are those qualities we want to see in leaders that will emerge come 2023. Part of those qualities are leaders who are decisive, who can take decisive actions when they need to. Leaders who are forthright, leaders who are futuristic, who are visionary, who can paint a picture of a future that would move every Nigerian towards walking from where we are there now to where we want to be.
Exactly. Leaders that understand where we are and know where we're supposed to do it, and more importantly, know how to take us from point A to point B.
Precisely.
Thank you so much, Professor Bell Ihua, Executive Director of African Polling Institute, for coming on the program to share your perspectives.
Always a pleasure.
To this issue. My name is Amaechi Anakwue. Thank you so much for joining us. It is part of our efforts to see to the continued existence of Nigeria, not just mere existence, prosperous, peaceful nation. That's the dream. Have a good time.